Very good morning to you. Welcome to Newsroom. We're coming to you live from our Auckland Park studios in Johannesburg. I'm Shante Hankis, of course, standing by with your sport is Kendo Makmate. Good to have you back in studio.
It's very good to be here. It's a very big day that we are commemorating and are busy with today, isn't it?
It definitely is. So throughout the day, we will be giving you a rolling coverage of Kiropetse Khotsitsile's funeral, which is taking place today. Of course, the proceedings are starting at Marks Park, and that is where we're actually going to cross this morning. Our reporters are giving us the on-the-ground updates and coverage of today. Mbali Sebanyone as well as Griselda Lewis on the ground in Marks Park. A very good morning to you. Take us through what's happening on the ground at the moment.
We're coming at you live from Marks Park right here in Johannesburg, where the official funeral of Professor Khotsitsile is expected to get underway at any moment now. We have been broadcasting the special broadcast from as early as 6 o'clock in the morning with our colleague Ntakwane Khatane, who's been at the family home in Diepkloof in Soweto, and now that family has already made its way here, and we are expecting this specific funeral to get underway. I will now cross over to my colleague Griselda Lewis, who will be joining us now for this broadcast from here onwards.
Well, thank you very much to my colleagues Mbali Sebanyone as well as Ntakwane Khatane, who've been with you since very early this morning. I'm Griselda Lewis, and I'll be joining you for this special coverage as we continue here from Marks Park in Johannesburg for the special funeral of Professor Kiropetse Khotsitsile, who died, of course, a celebrated man here in South Africa as well as around the world. You'd know that the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, will, of course, be delivering the eulogy, and you'd know that President Jacob Zuma had also earlier indicated that he's being accorded a special official funeral. Now, that is set aside for distinguished individuals, and of course, distinguished the professor was, you'd recall, the man who is being celebrated here today, who's someone who left South Africa exiled at just the mere age of 23 in 1961 to Dar es Salaam for a very short stint and moved to the United States, where he went to broaden his knowledge of black literature. And many are saying, of course, this is an individual who is one of the most well-published poets in this country, and also managed to bridge the divide between African literature as well as American poetry. Well, let's chat to many of those who he worked with now and celebrate this great man of South African soil. Ntate Phalojoran, thank you very much for your time this morning. You worked with the professor for a very long time. He was a special advisor when you were the Minister of Arts and Culture. Tell us about this man who's being celebrated. What was he like? What does he like to work with?
Well, I would say when it came to a question of choosing an advisor, with Willie at hand, I didn't have to think very hard, because I'd known him for a very long time as an accomplished cultural activist. But over and above that, I'd known Willie as a cadre of the ANC, so naturally my eyes fell on him. He's a brilliant guy, and I would say one of those people who knew how to use language and use it effectively. As a wordsmith, I think there are few who are his equals. He could have written prose, but I think he chose poetry because it is much more expressive, much more evocative, and I dare say also much more memorable. It's very easy to forget a passage of prose, but a well-written poem usually sticks with you. So that's the sort of man Willie Khotsitsile is. I took him out of a job because it wasn't as if he was unemployed when I took him. He was working for a newspaper then. It didn't last very long, called This Day. He gave up that job to come and work for government because I think he appreciated what we needed to do in the area of culture. One of the things that we were trying to do without necessarily broadcasting it abroad was to emancipate the South African cultural scene from its colonial and apartheid past and to Africanize it. So one of the things that, and one of the projects that we launched together was a number of literary prizes for literature written in the African languages. I don't know whether that has been retained by my successors. We also launched a project to republish the classics that had been produced in the African languages, because much as we tried to persuade them, our regular publishing houses here in South Africa just didn't seem interested in doing that. They didn't think it was profitable. So we got the National Library to work with a number of publishers to republish those classics. Willie took a very great interest in that as well. The other dimension, of course, in which South Africa has a very strong suit is in the area of music. And there too, what we tried to do was to revive some of the classical compositions, choral compositions in various African languages. And the vehicle we used for that was a brilliant arranger, who's now late, unfortunately, Victor Ntoni, who orchestrated and arranged those for orchestra and big band with the choir. I think they were quite effective performances we were able to stage using that format. So Willie's role with respect to South African culture and the work that we're doing together as the Minister of Arts and Culture, I think was very, very important. I think there is a tendency sometimes amongst us in this country not to fully appreciate the role that the arts can play in the reconstruction of our society. And it's something that we need to think about it very seriously.
That's exactly the point I wanted to get to, Ndate Jordan. He's been described as a man who had clarity of thought, and certainly you concur with that. How important was it for the arts during very difficult times in South Africa to use poetry to highlight the plight of black South Africans in this country during apartheid, doing that, of course, when he went into exile in Dar es Salaam, and using that in, for example, jazz shows in the United States of America to highlight this scourge against black people in this country?
Well, poetry, as you know, has always been an important part of African life here in South Africa. We have the tradition of Izimbongi, Baroque, right, etc. So poetry has always been an important dimension, which has always had a socially conscious and a politically relevant context as well. So that, I think, was carrying over into the modern era, a poetic tradition and cultural practices that were indigenous to South Africa. Because of the evocative character of poetry, it is, of course, one of the best ways of conveying, very hard-hitting points. Because, as I say, the lines are memorable and they can be short and they can be very expressive. Now, one of the things that Africans have always done was poetry and music. So what I suppose young American poets considered something new and revolutionary was something an old tradition on the African continent. And what Willie did was just to transpose that into the modern context. And because, again, you have African-derived music called jazz in the United States, that was relatively easy as well to merge those two, because the traditions, as you can well imagine, dovetail very well.
All right, and Ndate Palojaran, thank you very much for your insight as we continue this special broadcast. And you see some of the family members are now making their way into the main marquee, where all the guests will be paying tribute to South Africa's national poet, or poet laureate for that matter. Let's hand over now to my colleague Mbali Sibanyoni, who will continue joining us for this broadcast.
We are continuing with the special coverage of the funeral of Professor Kgosi. We are coming at you live from inside the marquee, where proceedings are expected to get underway at any moment now. Now I will take a step back and just show you the special visuals that we'll be seeing on our screens right now, as we can see that the body has now officially arrived. All right, we are now also joined by...
Well, the funeral is, the service itself is officially about to get underway now. As you can see, the coffin has made its way to the front of the marquee that has been set up here to pay tribute to this poet laureate. And you see there, it's now going to make its way to the front of the marquee before the actual service itself gets underway. We'll start off with the national anthem when that does get underway. And among those to pay tribute also here this morning as our very own Sipho Hot Sticks Mabuse, who will also render an item just very early on into the program. I think one of the striking poets that one perhaps could refer to of the works of the late Brawili, Khosi, in his work certainly highlighting the plight of black South Africans in this country during apartheid. Among those also in attendance here this morning is the top six of the ANC who arrived just a few moments ago and have also joined family members as they take their seats inside. Well, according to the program, the eulogy, which we did indicate will be delivered by the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, well, that will take place once many of the tributes have taken place. And I think in particular to note on the program as well is the musical tributes that will be paid to this late struggle stalwart, in that during apartheid, one of the tools that was used to highlight the plight of South Africans, black South Africans, was used through poetry as well as music. So quite fitting as well that there will be a musical dedication from Jonas Gwangwa as well as Dorothy Masuka, who have arrived here already. Well, as it would be with a special official funeral, you would have, of course, the pallbearers and bearers who would take their positions led by the chaplain general. And as I'd early indicated, a special official funeral is one that is set aside for distinguished individuals, that are bestowed, of course, by the president of the country, and distinguished indeed the poet laureate and struggle veteran Professor Newsroom was. Well, we're also joined in our studio by, many people who've been inspired by the works of the late professor, and joining us in studio is Ndadise Mazibuko, who you'd know, of course, is also very synonymous with the struggle for freedom in South Africa. And Ndadise Mazibuko, thank you very much for your time this morning as we all pay tribute. How were you inspired by Ndade Kgosi?
Griselda, let me start by even having to say it is such a pity that we have lost him at this time when this country is crying out, and when even the ANC is crying out for renewal and for peace and unity. This is the man who, in his academic posture and his artistic posture, and in his body works in poetry, was able to touch the hearts and heads of many of us who were also in the younger generation that followed them. And we needed Kgosi more than before. And particularly at this point, immediately, we are coming out of a terrible, years of division. He has been able to inspire some of us who were young leaders at the time, when he even wrote in some of his poems about the bullets that were faced by books of 1976. It is out of that where we picked up a lot of lessons from a man like him. And some of us who then went to jail at younger age, when we were reading, even out of illegally, in his body works and his poetry and all that. We kept on being inspired by the work of such a man. And we just want to say thank you for giving us such intelligence.
There'll now be a moment of silent prayer or meditation. Thank you. You may be seated. We'd like to acknowledge the Khosetsile family and Mrs. Khosetsile and the entirety of the Khosetsile family, the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, the Honorable Cyril Ramaphosa, former President Halima Monthlante, and other former Deputy President present here, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Balega Mbete, the Chief Justice, the Chairperson of the NCOP, National Executive Committee members and alliance leaders, honorable ministers, premiers, deputy ministers, MECs, members of the diplomatic corps, executive mayors and mayors, leaders of political parties, traditional leaders, religious leaders, our honored veterans, ladies and gentlemen. The ancients say, when a big tree falls, the earth is bound to shake. This rings true of what we've witnessed over the past couple of days. The passing of Professor Khosetsile has shaken all of us, the African continent and the world. Many memorial services have been held here in South Africa and in different parts of the world. This shows the level of respect that this icon of our liberation struggle and the well-known wordsmith has done to us. It is for this reason that the President of the Republic of South Africa has designated this as a special official funeral. Would like to say to the Khosetsile family and relatives, you are not alone. South Africa mourns with you. This national asset, our national poet laureate, as well as a recipient of the National Order of Ikhamanga, a man whose contribution will last for eternity. But we know that Brawili, as we used to know him, is not dead. He lives on through his poetry. I would like, before we start, to quote his epitaph to Ken Temba, which also rings true today. We think of you as an institution demolished by bulldozers of colonial design. We say what does not finish is ominous. So forever, like exile, is an enormous load to carry even for one cynical as you, though we can still not talk of you as dead, Maibuya. At this juncture, we'll call upon Ipeleng Khosetsile and Sipho Hotsticks Mabuze.
Up to the highest mountain, looked all around, couldn't find nobody. Went down into the deepest valley, looked all around down there, couldn't find nobody.
That is the live special coverage broadcast of Bra Willie taking place at Marks Park. Indeed, joining us in studio, we are joined by anti-apartheid activist Seth Mazibuko. Very good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Essentially, who was Professor Kgosi? Describe the man that he was.
I'd like to describe a prof at two levels, mainly. I was very far from his days of his youth. And very active participation in the 60s and 70s in exile. But some of us who then joined the generation of leadership, which maybe might have been the third from him, it was important to us to see a man that was able to use art and poetry to unite people. And not only to unite people, but also use the same works, to fight, social ills, to fight discrimination. And he was also able to use his work, to be able to integrate, different generations. We were at ease with Professor Kgosi as the young generation that came after them in dealing with issues that were fresh in our country. You could speak with Professor Kgosi about what happened in the 60s, and he'll go to town, at the academic and artistic level. You would speak to Professor Kgosi about what happened in the 70s, that's during our active time, and he will tell you, cross the T's and dot the I's, put a comma, put a full stop, could put a semicolon. And that is but you see one other thing, if you look at, for instance, his works, when he writes, before he used to write a lot lyrically, but when he came back from exile, he started writing more conversational poetry. And he was also speaking on or conversing on issues. And what was more disappointing is that most of the time, there was a reading of some losing of hope, of some of the things that he had expected, maybe in a new democracy. But now, wanting so much desperately to unite and rebuild, particularly also on issues of ethical leadership. He spoke to us very strongly about issues of leadership and ethical leadership. And I always say it is such a pity that most of his works are not included in the curriculum of our education today. It is such a pity that as students in South Africa are even starting to speak loud about the issue of decolonization of education or of curriculum, we have lost out on a man that shall have taken that process forward by bringing in, the poetry work, writing skills, and all that are very African and, for that matter, black.
How then do we preserve his history? How then do we preserve his contribution? It seems that one too many times, only once a person has passed on, that we seem to remember and seem to look at the significance and the importance that the person has done.
It is just good. It's just bad that we are a country that behaves that way, that only looks at your good when we are all, when you cannot speak anymore. But what is important now, and I intend making a representation to both government and the African National Congress.
It's not our own. But the mouths of fools are here, like accidents on any road. They will say you have left us. If they offer us the stillness of their tears, if you live in us, we shall not act You were survived by so-and-so and so-and-so in ritual delirium, talking about you as if you are no more than sentiment, talking about you as if you are no more than body, talking as if we are separate like mountains. But as long as we live, we shall do what you did. We shall build children and homes. Our bodies too shall be claimed by the earth we walk every day. And those with sense shall remind us that there is no death in life, only in death. That the old know not to ask for pity. That we shall all participate in this ritual, in spite of the salty taste of all the pitiful tears, as long as we live. Thank you.
One of his poems, and which is, I know that it took quite a big stage, the No Serenity here. And then he actually takes it up as a opening part. He says, an omelette cannot be unscrambled. Now listen to that, use of words. And then from there, the part that immediately resonated with me when I was listening to this poet is a part that says, poem, I know you are reluctant to see when there is no joy in your heart. What lines are we having here? What interpretation are we giving this? Here's a man now whose work, of poetry, okay, he goes now to bed as a good night and still speaks the language. And I'm happy that even the funeral is full of this artistic farewell of the man. So even that in the poem itself, it tells a very good night of a man that has worked and done so well in the issues of, academic and artistic work.
And I can also be a landscape of mirrors that name whatever moves or has pretensions to be alive. On the wingspan of my desire, easy as the approach of any day you can clearly remember, I can fly to any place or moment fertile with memory or create fresh ones without a single boundary. Though our lives remain so pathetically prosaic, with informed hope and resolve, we must know how to move forward to a landscape where our dreams cannot be turned into nightmare, where our dreams are always inside, where we must again redden the blackest folds of our memory and intent.
Like you can.
Thank you very much. My name is Paul Mashatile, MEC for Human Settlement in Gauteng and Treasurer General of the African National Congress. I will be working with Minister Jeff Hadebe to steer this program this morning. I'm grateful that the family has given us this opportunity. I happened to work with Prof. When I was the Minister of Arts and Culture. He was my advisor from 2010 until 2014, until I was not in government anymore at the national level. And of course, Prof had to live with me. And one day I said to him, Prof, we are starting a research and policy institute as the ANC in Gauteng. I want you to come and lead it. So that's where Prof was working until the time of his death or his passing. As you know, as the African National Congress at the time in Gauteng, we didn't have a lot of money to pay Prof what he was earning in government, but he gladly accepted what we could offer him at the time. We are here to pay tribute to this quiet giant, an intellectual, a man who did not want limelight, but had a lot to contribute. I will now call upon Mooki Millicent Diporo to come and pay tribute.
Nobody great, nobody greater than you. Come on, lift those hands for real in here.
To the program director, dignitaries, established protocol. What an awesome journey. A short journey full of memory. A short journey full of sickness. I met this human being. What do I mean by human being? A respectful somebody. A human par excellence. An academia. A human selfless. A human with dignity. But he wouldn't impose any on any person. He had dreams. Dreams to celebrate his 80th birthday. He had hopes. Hopes to finish what was he writing. Hopes to be well and that we may join each other and start going for exercises. But I'm not here for that. It was a short journey full of turbulences. On the 16th of December, he was in hospital. Mama baby called me and said, your father is sick. As usual, I'm a prayerful woman. I went there to hospital. I touched him and we prayed. And for the first time in the century, he uttered these words. Today, your prayer has brought clash of the choirs. And there was clash, cultural clash when you prayed. And I said, Mara Papa Will, I don't understand. What did you mean? And he just smiled. On the 17th, when we arrived in hospital, he had his laptop, he had his manuscript. I pulled Mama baby to the side. I said, this man, even on his uncomfortable bed, he has his scripts, his poets here. Can we just take it so that he can have more time to rest? And we did that without his permission. Let his soul rest in peace. I was called on the 31st as his life and the earth was trembling towards him. He never gave up. He had hope. When I arrived, I phoned first, and the person who picked up the phone, it was Papa Will. He said, my daughter, my wife, my whatever, take courage, be strong for Mama Baby, because I am ready for whatever the doctors want to do. I went to the hospital, and on the 3rd of January, Mama Baby holding his hand, reading his poet, he graciously gave in to the universe. To you, Mama Baby, I will give what I always give you. Take courage. Read Psalm 37. In my time of distress, I will call to my Lord. He will answer me. He will give me strength, and he will give me time to rest. And in my rest, he will guide my path. Ibu, we travel this journey together. It was not an easy journey, but we were together. Bring unity to your siblings. Bring love to your siblings. Bring the family together, because you know what happened that day. To the children, it's up to you what you do with your father's life. Friends, Papa Trevor, Papa Mandla, Mama S, as I call you, we traveled this journey. It was not an easy journey. Please travel with us this journey, because it's going to be a long, winding road. When I arrived in his bedroom, where his children are full, which is his study, he called it his bedroom for his children. I found the poem on the desk. To us South African who are mourning him today, I will read, quote, "Wounded Dreams" by Keorapetse Khosi Utsile. If you have never walked through this restless shadow of wounded dreams, beware, beware, beware. Youth tomorrow might curse you by not wanting to remember anything about your ways. Let us do right, so that we must be remembered by the right things. To Papa Will, I quote from the same poet, "Never again, I say never again, will pain return to the heart of your soul, no shame to your soul. Be rooted in the ground, the son of Africa." I salute you.
Thank you. Prawili had a large family and friends. I was one of those who stayed with Prawili in Dar es Salaam during the exile times in his apartment when he was a professor at University of Dar es Salaam. The fountain of knowledge that one got from him is irreplaceable. I was there, sis baby, Mrs. Khositsile, when he courted and later married our national speaker, Baleka Mbete. His contribution to all of us will never be forgotten. But he also had many friends who were as good as he was, like Mandla Langa and Barbara Masigela, who will now come to pay their tribute to him. Mandla Langa and Sis Barbara Masigela.
Master of Ceremonies, sis baby, Hositsile, and the family, the extended family, everyone who loved Brawili, Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa and President of the African National Congress, as they say, all protocols observed. Brawili would haul me over the coals if I came here and spoke as a friend and I did not disturb the peace. I was privileged to see him on these last days, privileged because I could hold on to the various memories when he had been able, when he had been hale and hearty, and when at last that light was diminishing in his eye. I knew that I would never, not any longer, be the same person after his death, because in that moment of his passing, he communicated the need for all of us to live meaningful lives, to understand that the road is long and strewn with thorns and glass shards, but that we have to walk to get to the other side. He made me see that a squandered moment is a blasphemy, an insult to all of those who had sacrificed their lives to give us this space in which to fight and change that which is harmful for future generations. Hositsile had an undying respect for language, which is why he was a poet. And by language, I don't mean his English, the English language in which he wrote, which he had mastered, but the transmission of emotions and evocations of the spirit of humanity inherent to all encounters. He had in him to write in any language, in any of the languages he spoke fluently. From the Setswana, he had suckled from the breast of his mother, Khalegobe Mary Hositsile, the woman who set him on this long and returnless journey to self-knowledge. It is a self-knowledge that gives rise to empathy. Writing, especially poetry, which many consider a refined art form, involves splitting oneself into as many pieces as there are characters in a story. In telling the story of his children, of the children of this country, as well as the story of the children of the workers and peasants, the underclasses of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, Brawili was drawing on his own childhood, remembering the hideous price people paid for the sin of being born black in the country of their birth. In writing about music, it was both the cadence of speech, which had been condemned to silence, and the triumphant howl of the revolutionary who had finally made a choice to grab his or her own destiny by the scruff of its neck. He wrote about leaders. He wrote about Tambo. He wrote about Mandela. He wrote about Sisulu. He wrote about Malcolm X. He wrote about Kotane. He wrote about so many people who have passed, who have made us the people that we are today and whom we have to emulate. He wrote about H. Reb Brown and asked the question, what does a penny buy? It buys a box of matches. Brawili celebrated and respected women. He composed anthems to their beauty and grace, and he unearthed from the archives the memories of women like Dora Tamana, Lillian Ngoyi, Charlotte Maxege, Helen Joseph, and many, many stalwarts, women who struck a rock, some of whom would be very, very appalled at the rise of patriarchy in our country. More than all that, Brawili was a scholar who was self-effacing, who was one of the few lights we have in this darkness. He was a fighter, a revolutionary, unafraid to work in the underground, a deserving soldier of Mkhonto weSizwe, a member of MK. He had the soul that would not be for sale. He was a friend with whom every moment was a masterclass in what it meant to be a human being. A true patriot, he believed that he reserved the right to criticize his own country. Finally, I would like to say that leaders wielding borrowed power will not change South Africa. Young men and women reading poetry and understanding the sanctity of life will change it. In that changed life, we will remember Kgoshitsile Brawili, a lean and sparse figure, the leanness of a man who didn't want to take up much space, but who now fills the imagination of the world. We will remember his preoccupation with the struggles of the Palestinians, of the people of the Sahrawi Republic, who believed that his own freedom was meaningless if it was not tied to the freedom of everyone. We can only enliven his vision if we promise to be true to ourselves. We must fight all power that comes without morality, because that is the first step towards tyranny. We must think and question everything and interrogate the question that gives us easy answers. We must debate everyone, no matter how powerful, and strive every day to wrestle the lie to the ground. Brawili, I know love, I know brotherly love from you. Love is indeed a revolutionary act. My brother, my friend. Thank you.
President of the African National Congress and Deputy President of South Africa, my sister, Baby, Willie's children, and as they say, all protocol observed. It is almost 2 weeks since Professor William Giurapetsi Kgoshitsile passed away at Mill Park Hospital. And rarely has our country experienced such continuous and rousing tribute to a poet and a scholar. It is instructive that he lived amongst us as a father, as a husband, as a scholar, a political activist, and we were none wiser of his formidable reputation in the Pan-African world as well as the wider world of post-colonial literature. It is not surprising, though, because the contribution of artists in general to society has been neglected to such a great extent that sometimes they hardly feature even in the syllabus of the educational institutions of their country. A dedicated artist and a teacher, Willie, as we all fondly knew him, was also a freedom fighter whose contribution to our liberation struggle has yet to be appreciated in full. In part, it is because he hardly coveted a position in the leadership stakes, but rather sought to hone the skills of upcoming artists and students. He worked within the universities in Africa and in the United States. He traveled all over the world to speak, to represent South Africa in conferences and all kinds of fora, where he carved a position of respect and admiration, not only for our country, but for himself. He was a dazzling wordsmith whose eloquence and cadences derived from his love and mastery of the Setswana language, fused with his love for South African music and American jazz. An impeccable scholar, he embraced all the peoples of the world, and his only yardstick was freedom, justice, and equality. As a cadre of the ANC, he was principled and well-informed on the politics of the day. And he upheld an internationalist approach. He eschewed blind loyalty, and despite his gift of a questioning mind, he never sought confrontation for its own sake. He preferred to mine his answers in his poems, through which he revealed the truths of a well-lived life. His roots were firmly entrenched on the continent of Africa, and all his endeavors were integral to the seeds that were planted and that grew throughout the African diaspora, where he is known and loved by his peers. He was a father to all of his children, including his literary offspring here in South Africa. He nurtured and mentored young poets with rigor and unbounded affection, giving them pride in what they were creating. An intrepid intellectual giant who did not suffer foolishness, which he called nonsense. He participated in forums all over the world, seeking the truth of his oneness with the human race. His voyages were about persuading as many as he could about the holiness of culture, of the arts, and their power to transform and enrich the actual lives of the people. An ordinary worker citizen of his country, He regarded his creativity as a legitimate calling equal to any other. He sought no special entitlements or extraordinary compensation for doing what he loved most. His love for baby Dorcas Khosisile was legendary. And as old friends, we were astounded and impressed by their devotion to each other. I think one might say, too, that because of his stature, because of his unique looks, one would not have expected it, but he was actually greatly loved by women all over the world, and he loved them too, and respected them. Separated from his country of birth for decades, Khosisile never lost his accent, which to the very end retained a measure and a rhythm unmangled by living overseas, unlike some of us who visit overseas for 2 weeks and come back with new accents. The diversity of all the places he'd been to and where he came from never clashed, because he never had a doubt of where he wanted to go. We mourn his loss and celebrate his life in which he lived to the fullest, till his demise here at his home in South Africa, where he belonged. One of Willie's favorite songs in New York over 50 years ago was Georgia, Georgia on My Mind, as sung by Ray Charles. He would play it irritatingly over and over and over again, and it was only much later, when I delved deeper into history and literature, that I understood his obsession with the song. First, Ray Charles had successfully extracted an apology from the Georgia state governor for a racial incident that he had suffered. So for Willie and many of us, the song was a triumph against racism. Georgia, like apartheid South Africa, epitomized one of the bedrocks of United States racism, which unfortunately is re-emerging in the figure of Donald Trump. It was one of the bedrocks of US racism and inequality, not only during slavery, but until up to the very cumulative victories of the United States civil rights movement. Above all, for the black people of Georgia, it was the only home they had, it was the only home they knew. Willie's love of the song was because it stood for the indomitable human spirit of blacks in the South of the United States. It was not surprising much later he became a professor at a university in South Carolina. He had an abiding attachment to the people of the South because it reminded him of South Africa. When we were setting up the ANC Department of Arts and Culture in Lusaka, it was Mandalanga who suggested we bring in Willie, who had just come from Zimbabwe to join us in Lusaka. We dreamt big cultural dreams for a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, united South Africa. And so, together with many others, like Lindiwe Mabuza, Mongane Sirute, Louise Colvin, Gwen Ansel, Vusi Mavimbela, the late Bachana Mukwena, Tele Muema, Mabatu Ntlantla, Jonas Gwangwa, and many, many more. In the beginning and in the end, Willie was always about the importance of the development of an ethical culture rooted in our history, in the history of our people in Africa and the diaspora. It was not something that would be engineered or imposed. Neither was it a factional project driven by any personality cult. Rather, it was rooted in the history of Africa, the crucible of our collective experience of creativity, whose beauty lies in its functionality, in the alchemy of the imagination of new ideas that always erupt and shine a direction for perpetual renewal. Inasmuch as Kgosisile's poetry captures the vicissitudes of his well-lived life, within his tenderness and candor also lurked a strict, no-nonsense disciplinarian who brooked neither empty sloganeering nor blind conformism as an end unto itself. Experience for him was not merely anecdotal. It was a light burning bright, preempting the darkness and the pain of destructive, indulgent willfulness. And so, we lived, we were young, we struggled, we became older, and we came back home. But before that, we were in Lusaka, and we planned, we discussed, we argued together with our comrades about carving out ways and means out of the darkness of apartheid and colonization. We knew then, as we now know, we knew then, as we know now, that a child who had never had the chance to ride a bicycle would not easily understand the notion of motion as his own right too. That the vastness and power of the ocean could also reside in swimming in smaller waters. That seeing a movie or watching Miriam Makeba's inimitable performance or seeing a play or a painting could also take you there. In short, that all humanity share traits, and that what has been created belongs to all of us, and that we should make it accessible to every one of our children. He has left us now, he of the wide, easy smile and the look that pierced through synthetic attitude. But forevermore will his silence be broken by the music of his poetic life and his poems. His love, his anger, his impatience for our enlightenment, his eloquence and quiet thunder of his wisdom, we hope will enable us to have the temerity to look into the eyes of our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barbara. I'll now call upon Lebu Mashile for a poetic tribute. And I'll like Sibeletso Mukoni Matabani to also come up front to the stage. Lebu.
To Mama Baby and to the entire Khositsile, Moagi, and Mabalane clans, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your beloved with us. He was a father to me and a friend and a teacher. To the poetry community, he was all of that. An eternal mentor and muse, a fellow traveler, a constant debater. Our poetry community has lost perhaps one of our greatest living libraries. His devotion to literature was such that I often witnessed him introduce himself while he was poet laureate to very young writers as a student of literature. And I was told that in the days leading up to his passing, he was editing his final book, from which I will read today, which will be published in a few weeks' time. Today, I share with you 2 poems from that collection titled Home Soil of My Blood. The poems are for our mother of the heavy names and Rejoice. Samaya Sintle, Mama, walk good. Ipuseng, we must fulfill the mission your name commands. Halechobe. Life will not sap us of our energies, for we shall create and create. Arwa, valiant comrade of the Red Sea lands, did you not teach the English a lesson? Our mother of the heavy names, though this is your visit, you are not a guest here, neither of honor, nor of any sentimental shaping or ordering of this day, or any other reality we experience and know. Our mother of the heavy names, walk good. You are not the sole celebrant here. We claim your joy as ours. And though I know I cannot sing or play my voice like a horn the way Lady Day does, I celebrate all the arrivals of peace. From the future, I see dancing in your mischievous eye and smile today. Rejoice, says Tebe Neruda of the vibrant smile. The eye so curious it is reluctant to shut out the world even in sleep. I am the dream keeper, he says. The spontaneous song and dance pulsating with the force of my people's ethos. Watch me and rejoice. Our sister, Betty Carter, repository of our memory, whose mouth is free of all untruth, who plays her voice as a horn, says you can do anything you want to do if you know what to do. I am witness and celebrant here because I know what to do. I am the dream keeper, I say, the mouth that tells no lie. I am not a man, I am a boy, harvested from my people's memory. Watch me and rejoice. Poet, leave him alone. You have praised him. You have praised him without knowing his name. His name, his mouth that tells no lie.
Bagolo Dumelang, baby, lila pala ha khositsile limwagi mabalani. Rare relalilona. We've also lost a member of our family. Events of the past few days, the death of my dear brother, friend, comrade, mentor, took me back, way back to our youthful 20s. It took me back to an exhilarating, can-do, optimistic period when many young people in America challenged the status quo in many different ways. And Khositsile was there. Of course, these young people were not a homogeneous group. They were the flower children that lived life with complete abandon, far less materialistic than their parents. This generation of young people joined hands with others from all over the world to take a stand against discrimination, against injustice, the deprivation that was suffered by Black people in America, particularly in the South, where there had been lots of lynching of Black men, and in the North too, where Black men mostly were harassed by the police whenever they wanted to stand their ground. And of course, there was the incident of the children that were killed in a church in Mississippi on a Sunday morning. There was fire all over in the United States, major cities, especially in the North. But of course, there was also Vietnam and the young people protesting against the war they did not understand. Didn't understand why they had to travel very, very far to kill people who had not done anything to them. Khositsile being an internationalist, understood and appreciated what was going on, formed a solidarity with the people who were fighting against oppression. He participated in a number of activities, including going to the South to assist black people to register to vote, because the state governments did not want black people to vote. So he moved to the US, became an integral part of the African American community, but in the process, because he was focused on working with the young people, he worked with young people at universities from all over the world. It was the beginning and the height of the Black Power movement, where young people, black people, were screaming, "I'm black and I'm proud." Young people screaming, "Black power." And young people also saying, if you are not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. You cannot be a bystander when all of these atrocities were happening not only in America, but the rest of the world. Willie and his peers in the United States, fellow artists, painters, musicians, decided that it was not enough to hurl slogans at the system, that there has to be deep, deep roots to guide and nurture the young people, because it's only the Caribbean, from Cuba, Palestinians, to and grow for liberation. Willie was not a hangers-on, so to the Amiri Bar got a renowned photographer at the time, and many, many others, the Gwendolyn Brooks, Jane Cortez. He was working with his peers. It's not like he was sort of on the side seeing what it is that we're doing. Together they built a solid foundation for cultural struggles for people in the US. They needed to be grounded. And so when Willie would move from campus to campus, talking with young people, sharing ideas with them, debating their issues, it was really incredible to see, because there were times when I would be surprised that people knew about Willie. You need to remember that this was pre-mobile phones, pre the public internet, pre-social media. But people knew about Willie. They knew about Willie and his work. So even before they met him, they knew about Willie because he was so entrenched in the struggle for liberation in the United States, and clearly understood that that did not take away from his focus on the liberation of South Africans. He understood the interconnectedness of the struggles of oppressed people everywhere. One of the qualities that Willie had, which one, at least I really admired, was that he was not sectarian. He did not merely communicate with, say, people because they were ANC or SACP or whatever it was. we were all people fighting a common cause. And so, for instance, with the South African community, it did not matter whether you were from the PAC or Unity Movement or whatever it is. He engaged you as a fellow South African or a fellow African. And that cut across when he engaged with Africans from other part of the continent. Because you see, Willie had very little regard, if any, for political borders that were established at the Berlin Conference dividing Africa. And so we're all brothers and sisters in his eyes. And he continued, even when coming back home, he never was sectarian. He was appalled and pained by the atrocities suffered by people from other parts of the other parts of Africa. There's xenophobic attacks that he experienced throughout this country. It really did indeed sadden him. Willie also, as has been mentioned before, had a profound love of the Setswana language and really had very regard for people who would indeed go to the US or the UK for 2 weeks and say, oh, I forgot my language, it's so difficult, with an affected accent. You know, he would simply say, you know, I really have no time for such fools, because they were indeed foolish to despise their very backgrounds, their very being. Inelimutu Wabatu, we will miss him dearly. We will miss his smile, his mischievous eyes. He was a brother. He really nurtured young people, wasn't selfish that way. Inelisikhanga Sarona Rare Khaitsadi Robalaka Khotsa Robalaka Kahisa, and thank you so very much for the legacy that you have left, not only us but the world. It is the challenge for us to move on with our lives using what he has left us as a torch, so that we can indeed grow and make this a better South Africa, a better world, a better Africa. And I thank you.
Thank you, Sister Palazzo. Brawili was respected and liked by artists, intellectuals, and activists across the continent. One thing that he detested with a passion was an injustice of any kind, even including his own government. During the flare-up of attacks in 2008, he penned one of his most stinging poems in post-apartheid South Africa, where he wrote, "In no serenity here, even the sun, embarrassed, withdraws her warmth from this atrocious defiance and unbridled denial of the ties that should bind us here and always. And the night will not own any of its stench of betrayal which has desecrated our national anthem." One of his brothers was a revolutionary intellectual, Paulo Jordan, as well as our musical icon, Jonas Gwangwa, who will now come to pay their tribute as well as a musical rendition. Comrade Paulo Jordan and Jonas Gwangwa.
Thank you, Program Director. Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the ANC and Deputy President of South Africa. To my sister, baby Dorcas Khositsile, to the children and grandchildren of my brother and comrade Willie Khositsile, the Khositsile family, the extended family, I wish to say the pain of parting with one so beloved is, of course, almost unbearable. But I think you can take comfort in that your loss and bereavement is shared by a nation, is shared by the arts community here in South Africa, is shared by a Pan-African fraternity and sorority of poets, writers, and creative artists. So as you grieve, we grieve with you. So in your bereavement, we implore you to draw strength and comfort from our own deeply felt condolences and solidarity. Willie has fought the good fight, and he fought it with uncommon courage and determination. He truly did excel in the field of endeavor that he chose. He chose two fields of endeavor, that of a freedom fighter and that of a poet, and has been testified by the tributes he has received over the past week. I think we can all say that the nation and his people truly honor him. Umdengentonga. Umdengentonga. There are few who earned that title from their peers. One such was the late great musician Todd Matshikiza, and it's a title that derives from a very masculine pursuit, stick fencing that young boys do. And the title implies that though this fellow might be short in stature, when you give him his fighting sticks, he can match even the tallest amongst you. Consequently, it's not a title that is easily bestowed, and the one who receives it, you can be certain, has earned it by his works, by his fighting skills, but in this case, by his deeds and his words. Today we lay one such to rest, Kyarapetsi William Khositsile, a very short man indeed, but one who was the match and who outformed many, who exceeded him in size, in age, and in wealth. Willie was not only a giant in our liberation struggle, he was also a giant on the African literary scene. He was a giant in a Pan-African literary scene that stretches across the Atlantic. Ewe, wayengumdengentonga. It was a warm April day in New York City in March of 1964 when I approached the door of a basement flat in Upper Manhattan, 310 West 87th Street. I rang the bell, waited, and after a short while, a very short little fellow with very distinctly South African features appeared. I knew immediately I could speak to this man with ease. Hey, Brigade, I said. That was my first encounter with Willie Kgotsitsile. And it was perhaps our shared interest in politics and the arts that made us such close and fast friends. And from that moment on, we became very, very close friends and comrades. We met during a time of unprecedented social and political upheaval. The human rights struggle in the United States was reaching its peak. On the 28th of August, 1963, the capital of the United States had been besieged by a huge march, a mammoth march including people of every hue and color, of every race and creed, marching for freedom and for jobs. By April 1965, there was another mammoth march on Washington, which brought thousands to that city protesting the war in Vietnam. We were living through the age of Malcolm X. This was the age of Ho Chi Minh. This was the age of Ernesto Che Guevara, who during those days pronounced that the path to freedom and an end to imperialism was to create 1, 2, 3, and many Vietnams. Revolution was in the air in virtually every continent, but especially in Africa, in Asia and Latin America. We will recall that here at home, that decade had commenced with the Sharpeville massacre of March 21st, 1960. The victorious Algerian Revolution, 1961, resonated very strongly with us here in the White Redoubt of Southern Africa. And in July of 1967, many of mine and Willie's contemporaries, then serving in Umkhonto Wesizwe, received their first baptism in fire during the Hwange and Sipolile campaigns in Zimbabwe. Campaigns about which one of our poets wrote, "I sometimes feel a cold love burning along the shuddering length of my entire spine. It's when I think of you, mother, step, motherland, who casts off her litter with a bitter spurning. Then I know, quite quietly and sure, that before we forge a single plow, before the earth will take new seed, we must march the length of your life with harsh boots upon our feet." Willie was one who was determined to join that march with harsh boots across the life of our motherland, because that was the only path to freedom. On the East Coast, where he studied, Willie found a niche among a very vocal, radical African nationalist milieu, then headed by a fellow poet who gave himself the name Amira Baraka, but who had been baptized as Leroy Jones. They operated from a number of centers in Harlem, from the Lower East Side of Manhattan and later out of Newark. It was a movement that inspired critical arts, embracing poetry especially, the theater, the visual arts, and of course music. This was the time when the creativity of the African peoples in the Americas was once again finding inspiration from its African past. Some of them even harking back to Pharaonic Egypt. But even as he energetically participated in that African American literary scene, penning very insightful reviews and producing his first anthology of poems, Spirits Unchained. That anthology earned him a number of prizes, including the Harlem Cultural Council Poetry Award and a National Endowment for the Arts Poetry Award. Willie was a nationalist, but he was never a mindless nationalist which embraced essentialism. As a critical thinker and as an incisive analyst, Willie always closed his ears to the siren songs of those fundamentalists who imagined that we could somehow excavate and resurrect some romantic vision of our African past and make that the future of our continent. He sang his praises to the outcomes produced by knowledge, by science, by modern technology, and by human ingenuity. This was his vision for his own country. And we must make no mistake about it, Willie always considered himself a man of the left. And the left has certain features which are very distinctive. It is internationalist, it is nurturing, and it embraces all of humankind as its moral universe. And in keeping with those values, Willie identified and found a role for himself and his poetry in the struggles of other peoples fighting imperialism, colonialism, oppression. It was in that political environment that we began building the networks amongst progressive writers, musicians, and others, which was to prove invaluable as a solidarity resource when our own South African struggle gained momentum. And in the United States, should never forget, it was, in the main, adherents of the left amongst whom we found a resonance and a ready response. That infectious climate of optimism about change, that infectious period during which all of us entertained great hopes for the future, stimulated new and groundbreaking currents of dissent, especially in the United States itself. And one dare say that it was the initiatives taken during those years of the early and the mid-60s that culminated in the second wave of feminism and even in the struggle for the civil rights of the LGBT community. Willie's poetry celebrated not only what the muse had awakened in him, but it also celebrated the whirlwind of social change that we were living through. And the sources of his inspiration, African, Latin American, and international. He established himself as a significant African poet when he published his second anthology titled Africa is My Name in 1971. The institution Willie came to occupy in this country, that of poet laureate, is as old as the African homeland itself. The poet laureate was the chronicler of his community. He was also the community's collective conscience. It was the poet's role to recall and interpret social values which had been transmitted through poetry, through tales, through dance, through song, and of course, in the home. And wielding his craft, the poet had the unequivocal right to criticize, to condemn, to censure, and to denounce societal leaders and the powerful when they strayed. But he fulfilled that role not in the capacity of one who was being retributive. The poet's role was to offer solutions, to map the path forward, to serve justice by finding ways of reconciling the disputants. I think Willie sought to play that role when he was awarded that distinction in 2006. But detachment and neutrality were never options for a poet of Kgotsitsele's standing. He had chosen his side in the struggle against injustice at a very early age. And he wrote from that perspective. He wrote with commitment and with passion because he believed in the objectives he was pursuing. Returning to Africa in '75, he took up a post first at the University of Dar es Salaam and then various other African universities, where he played an important role stimulating African scholarship and also contributing to the literary traditions of this continent. Our movement recognized the full potential of the arts, I think only after Festac, the African Arts Festival that took place in Nigeria during 1977. Operating from what we used to call the forward areas, Lesotho and Botswana, the ANC had slowly begun to build up a national network of progressive artists across these borders. So when he moved to Botswana, Willie was integrated into that aspect of political work through Me Do, an artist collective established by Mongane, Seruti, and others in Gaborone, Botswana. When the ANC established its own Department of Arts and Culture under the leadership of Barbara Masekela in 1986, it was inevitable that Willie would be drawn into that department. And as an activist of that department, he played an important role in the Culture and Resistance Conference in Gaborone, and later in the Culture in Another South Africa Festival in Amsterdam in December '87. Both these events were important milestones in bringing together the artists, the progressive artists of South Africa with those who were in exile, and also in building networks between progressive artists in South Africa and those in Europe active in the solidarity movement. It was in recognition of these roles that when he returned home, Willie was elected chairperson of the Congress of South African Writers. We were of a generation born just before the Second World War or during the Second World War. And consequently, we grew into our adolescence during the 1950s, that first decade of National Party rule. We witnessed the construction of a comprehensive system of national oppression, pursued with a fanatical determination, which left few illusions about either the intent or the impact of the policies that were being imposed on us. Consequently, our generation readily responded when Nelson Mandela made his call to arms in December 1961. Willie Khotsitsile was among the first group of comrades instructed to leave the country to help set up the ANC's external mission. First, he found a job in journalism in Dar es Salaam, but as we know, in July '63, there was that notorious raid on Rivonia, and as a consequence of which, responsibility for leading the movement devolved on the external mission. And that was to be an extremely trying time for all of us. Reconstructing the movement's internal machinery and equipping it to assume leadership of mass struggles took much longer than many of us had anticipated. And the attrition proved intolerable to some of us. Others were demoralized by the setbacks the movement suffered and the slow pace at which events unfolded. Some threw in the towel and sought escape in greener pastures. Others, in despair, turned to self-destruction. But throughout those 28 years he lived in exile, Willie never lost confidence in the liberation movement, the liberation struggle, or in our capacity to overthrow the racist regime. And he employed the gift he'd been endowed with to sing his song of freedom and to celebrate the struggle for a better world. He performed this with restraint and with a skilled use of language, composing works of great beauty, yet uncompromising in their partisanship. Willie wrote and performed his poetry with a passion and commitment. What commended him to our young poets was precisely that passion, but also his personal warmth, his exuberance, and that irrepressible love of life. His keen sense of humor meant he was always fun to be with. But they also recognized in him a repository of experience, of knowledge, and he shared these very eagerly with the young. And I think the tributes of the younger poets testify to that. His talent produced 3 more anthologies by the year 2004. So when it came to my choosing a ministerial advisor after I was appointed Minister of Arts and Culture that year, it was a no-brainer that Willie Khotsitsile would fulfill that role. Kya rapetsi Willie Khotsitsile succeeded Bazisi Kunene as South Africa's Poet Laureate in the year 2006. It was a post he filled with modesty and an impressive dignity. And his untimely passing does indeed represent a great loss for the South African arts community. I, as a friend of long standing, am still weighing and sorting what his passing will mean to me. And I think it will take some time for me to come to terms with it. Some 60 years ago, another great African poet, Samuel Nkai, in tones which I think Willie would have identified with and would probably have referred to himself, declaimed, "Diyakuhlala dinani phina dingumntu nje, dingumntu nje into ehlala ihambele, dingumntu nje into ehlala ifuduke, dingumntu nje into ehlala igoduke." Translation: how could you have expected me to be with you always, I being but a simple human? Being but a simple human, one who lives amongst you, then travels afar. Being but a simple human, one who will live amongst you and then move away. Being but a simple human, one who will live amongst you, but then will one day return to his home. Comrade Willie Khositsile is not lost to us. He has merely gone back home to rest. But his words and deeds have indeed made him immortal. Thank you.
President of the ANC, all protocol observed. Lelapa la Khositsile go Motsegang. I knew Willie in 1957. We shared a desk, a classroom desk at Madibani High School after I left St. Peter's Secondary School. From then on, we were friends. He was very tight because I was also playing my trombone already. Him and his other friend, Willie Matavani, used to walk me to the bus stop because I lived in Orlando, and they were immediate fans. So they protected me from the young thugs of Western Native Township. Anyway, we hung around quite a bit together until I left. And then I met him in America, in New York. He came from Tanzania with various other students that were sponsored by the United States State Department. They picked them up from Tanzania and brought them to the US, and they were put at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Hugh Masekela and I shared an apartment in New York, and these students used to come to New York to visit. They actually spent most of their time at 310 or 37. And Willie was amongst those students. Most of them were actually from the PAC, and there were some from ANC, and there were about 4 of us who were ANC at the time. I was ANC because I had been put into that position by Father Huddleston when I was in St. Peter's, because we, as the Huddleston Jazz Band, which was a high school band, actually were raising funds. We raised funds for the Freedom Charter in 1955. We played at the Orlando Communal Hall to raise funds for the Freedom Charter. And we were there in Cape Town in 1955. So Huddleston had encouraged us, you know, to work with the ANC from that time on. We were still students though. And then in 1964, we met again in Botswana with Willie, and we were in Medu, where a whole lot of artists in different disciplines met in Botswana to do the Festival of Arts and Culture there. And that was also taken to the Netherlands in 1987. We were very close friends with Willie, especially because he loved music very much. I am not going to say very much because a whole lot of people have said everything that I want to say, and everybody else is still going to be saying that. I am going to play him one of my favorite songs, which we shared together, one of his favorite songs, rather. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the tribute. I'd like to now call upon Professor Mandla Makanya and Elina Sisulu to come to the stage to pay their tributes. In the meantime, can I get Trevor Fowler and Joseph Langa to be ready to read condolences messages? Professor and Elina Sisulu.
Thank you so much, program directors, Minister Jeff Radebe and MEC Paul Mashatile, who is also the Treasurer General of the African National Congress. Your Excellency, the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, Dr. Cyril Ramaphosa, and also the President of the African National Congress, and your entire leadership, that is inclusive of your top 6, the executive of the ANC, all the members of the political formations who are with us here today. May Baby Khositsile, the family and relatives of Professor Kyurapetsi Khositsile, members of the diplomatic corps, representatives of the civil society, business sector, international community, faith-based organizations, as well as the leaders of various communities of our own society, members of the academic community, arts and culture practitioners and activists, distinguished audience, I am deeply honored and humbled by the honor of being asked to say a few words as we bid farewell to this great son of Africa and an extraordinary being. On a solemn occasion like this farewell and the tribute to a person who was small in physical stature and yet a towering giant in terms of his intellectual contribution to the academia and the creative arts, I am pulled by 2 sets of emotions. The one of mourning the loss and the one of celebrating the profoundly impactful, purposeful life well lived. Indeed, a giant African baobab tree and a pillar of our academic community has fallen. And yet, we celebrate the fact that he has been immortalized by his extensive and impactful academic and artistic work, thus defying the African proverb that says, when an elder departs from this earth, it is as if a whole library has bent down. His work, his footprint, and his legacy is a living testimony that the library of knowledge has been preserved, and it is up to us to drink from this fountain of wisdom. Since the time when the news broke that Brawili had succumbed to the life's final arbiter, we as the academic community have been heartened by the widespread deluge of tributes from all corners of our country, our continent, and from around the world. This experience is often seen when iconic political figures or celebrities pass on, but today, through this experience, we know that knowledge and creative arts in our society and in the world really matter. This extraordinary experience is a testimony of the creative genius as well as a character of this great son of Africa. The rise of this son of Africa from the humble beginnings of Madibane High School to the globally renowned academic institutions such as Lincoln University, Pennsylvania University, University of New Hampshire, Columbia University, and our own University of Dar es Salaam, as many other institutions across the continents, is a testimony that this determination and deep conviction that made this iconic figure who he is overcome the disadvantaged background, as we know of, in our own existence from this part of the world. This should be a lesson for all of us that the past does not and should not have a veto over one's destiny. Brawili, whom I have encountered on many occasions, was a great, outstanding scholar, poet, cultural activist, public intellectual, veteran of our liberation struggle, and a great soul who touched many young and old scholars and artists, both at home and abroad. His smile and warmth were often reassuring and inviting attributes that everyone he encountered felt at ease, and it was also a window to his generous spirit of never falling and failing human solidarity. In our democratic transition, there was a historical moment where the social sciences and humanities faced an existential threat due to an ill-advised policy position. Had that policy succeeded, we will not be able to produce a new generation and cohort of Brawili. We are grateful that that mistake was reversed and the new efforts to revive humanities and social sciences were witnessed in our country, also evidenced by our own Ministry of Higher Education and Training with our esteemed Institute of Social Sciences that is in existence today. Brawili was a well-accomplished scholar and a creative artist, and he was globally and nationally recognized. And his awards are numerous, as being mentioned by the speakers who came before me. But I would also like to mention the others that they did not mention, such as the Rockefeller Foundation Poetry Grant, the Conrad Kent Rivers Memorial Poetry Award, and the Herman Charles Bosman Award. So even though Brawili had received such an impressive string of awards and honors, he remained humble, and he also remained accessible because he lived a life of deep commitment to human advancement and also the African cause. He never allowed social distance between himself and our people. He fully understood that for society and humanity to advance, the gap between the town and gown has to be closed. He appreciated the fact that the level between the ivory towers of knowledge and the downtrodden masses in the valley had to be eradicated. And yes, engaging him gave a distinctive impression that he always affirmed a meaningful dialogue between our certificated Western educated professors and barefoot village professors who are the carriers and bearers of our African indigenous knowledge systems. As we embark on the task of transforming and decolonizing our education system, we should be reminded of the works and insights of great scholars such as Brawili, who provided content and possibilities for imagining an education system that could, I would like to paraphrase along the lines of the vision of UNISA, shape futures for the service of humanity. Advocacy for writers to produce materials in their indigenous languages and building appreciation for literature was his paramount commitment. Among other transformative commitments, Kgositsile was a great supporter of book clubs and advocates that authors should write in the language they are most comfortable with, something that speaks to our effort to affirm our own African languages to be developed for academic and commercial use. Your Excellency, Deputy President, former President of the Republic, members of our own leadership in government and in civil society, our mother, Mayor Kgositsile, your children and grandchildren, our distinguished audience and friends. It was on the basis of these stellar accomplishments and contributions that we from the University of South Africa unanimously elected to confer a richly deserved honorary doctorate upon Professor Kgositsile. On the occasion of his acceptance of this honorary degree, he stated that he has been honored around the world, but this honor at home signified that indeed he had returned from the figurative exile and was welcome at his own home. Our special relationship with Brawili as an institution grew, but little did we know that he, his beloved wife, Baby Kgositsile, the children and grandchildren, would decide to donate the collection of the works of Professor Kgositsile to UNISA Library. Something that has deeply touched us is something that we want to acknowledge publicly. We shall engage Mayor Kgositsile and the family to ensure that we arrange a special event to mark this highly appreciated generosity of spirit. I can call upon the business sector and our own government, as well as our international donors, to work with us to develop a concept and programs that will ensure that the legacy of this great scholar soar to greater heights as he has gone to join the immortals. This great son of Africa, you have gone to join great African sages and your own peers, such as Chinua Achebe, Archie Mafeji, Eskia Mphahlele, W.E.B. Du Bois, Mala Angelou, Amilcar Cabral, Frantz Fanon, Ali Mazrui, James Baldwin, Walter Rodney, Miriam Makeba, and many others. We thank the family of Brawili for sharing this great son of Africa with our society and the world, for we are better beings that he has touched our creative lives. Words will never be adequate to express our deep sense of gratitude to you, Brawili, as you lay there, and your family. What a better way of closing these remarks than to remind us that our dream of a liberated and just society has yet to be fulfilled, which is in the full sense of Brawili when he reminds us in his poem, as was mentioned earlier, no serenity here, when he proclaimed that, quote, our memories of the struggle refuse to be erased. Our memories of the struggle refuse to die, unquote. Brawili, even though we love you and hold you in our memories and hearts, we say, Robala Gachotso, Tsamaya Hantle, Hambagatle, Kawela Ma-Afrika.
It's so good to speak after a Vice-Chancellor because he so elegantly goes through all the protocols. And since my speech is a continuation of his, I don't have to do that. Except to say, on this unimaginable occasion, we thank you, Sis Baby, for looking after our brother in his last days. And thank you for reminding us now and then that your brother needs you. Also to Brawili's children, we hold you close in our hearts and remind you that he delighted in you all. It's an honor to stand here today to salute a Pan-Africanist and an internationalist, something which is very important in this era of rising chauvinism and anti-intellectualism. There is a saying that when an old African dies, a library burns, as Professor Makanya pointed out. But happily, that does not apply in this case of Keropase Khosisile. Brawili has left us a library of his works, and the question is, what are we going to do with it? I'm not going to go talk about the past, but rather about this time, how we go forward in a world without the physical presence of our beloved Brawili. And repeat a conversation that we've often had with him about how best do we honor his legacy, a legacy of a writer. And for those who may think of putting up a statue, don't bother, because Brawili never liked statues. You can name a building after him, but it's not going to mean much if the people in those buildings are not reading his works. You can have a lecture named after him, but it won't mean much if the majority of people don't have access to that knowledge. We have a reading crisis in our country. And in case people start thinking I'm hijacking this to go onto a pet project of mine, please don't, because it's a conversation we've often had with Brawili. The Progress in International Literacy Study, or for short PIRLS, which is an international study which compares countries around the world. In that study, found that South African children rank among the lowest in the world in the area of reading achievement. And by grade 4, 78% of South African children cannot read for meaning. Now, I've often wondered, how can this be possible in a country that birthed Willie Khosisile? How can this be possible in a country that has a poetic legacy of Mkai, Jolobe, Dennis Brutus? How can this be possible in a country where we have a Don Matera, a country that has birthed Wali Seroti, Lebo Mashile? This is a challenge that one of our most urgent challenges going forward. And I'm glad that Deputy President Ramaphosa is very much seized with this issue of reading, because it is a crisis, and it is a crisis which we can meet. And one of the ways in which we can do it is by properly honoring the legacy of our writers and properly honoring the legacy of Brawili. And I won't talk too long just to say that we must make this library available. To the publishers and librarians, I say, make his work available. There shouldn't be a library where we enter where the works of our poet laureates are not available. To the educators, I say, prescribe his works. We would not have many of us read Shakespeare if his work was not prescribed. We need to prescribe the works of our writers. And to all of us, read the books and buy the books. As Professor Njabulos Ndebele said in his tribute to Brawili, long may he endure in our bookshops, libraries, classrooms, lecture rooms, theaters, churches, taxis, trains and buses, waiting rooms, and from time to time in Parliament, where politicians can remind themselves that they can become better at what they do if they were able to admit their folly more frequently. And just to add to this, I would like to say we had a conversation once, Brawili, Nuruddin Farah, and myself, on the state of literature in Africa. And one of the things that we noted was how seldom African politicians quote African writers. They can quote Yeats, Shakespeare, whoever else. Maybe Ben Okri might get a window in some way, but African writers are very seldom quoted by African politicians, and that's a challenge I would like to put today. And end with, I cannot better put it more eloquently than Sandile Memela in his tribute, who said, "The world is a stage, and you are a man of the word that has always been there, from the beginning to the end, to be a mirror of our souls, a clear expression of our wishes and hopes. Your spirit lives, and let us allow the spirit to live in the words in his words, for future generations. Thank you.
Trevor Fowler, where are you? And June, if you can please rush to the stage. We also received this one. You'll see how you can summarize it. Oh, yeah.
Sis baby, children, the Khosetsile, Moache, Mabalane, and the extended family. Deputy President, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, former President, Kgalema Motlanthe, ministers, members of parliament, comrades and friends. I'm sharing the reading of the tributes today with June Joseph's Langa, but I want to say that Bra Willie, we'll miss you. You were a mentor, a political activist, and through your words, you were able to talk about integrity, about justice, about freedom. Sis baby, the children, and the family. You've lost a father, a brother, a husband, and we hope that the words and the messages from around the world will provide you with the strength to carry on in this difficult period. We have a message from the Embassy of Iran, condolences from Professor Angela Davis, a former political prisoner and continues to be an activist for prison justice and political prisoners, and her sister, Dr. Fania Davis. We have a message from Mary Lou Patterson, Dr. Mary Lou Patterson, the daughter of Louise Patterson, who was a colleague, a friend of the great poet Langston Hughes. Charlene Mitchell, a political activist who ran for the first black woman to run for president in the United States in 1968 under the Communist Party ticket. A Professor Rubadiri, David Rubadiri, former Vice Chancellor of the University of Malawi, a former UN ambassador, and a former colleague of Bra Willie at the University of Botswana. He also, a message from Prexy Nesbitt, a close friend who was on his way here, but unfortunately was not able to get a seat on the plane that would get him here on time. He's an eminent political activist, social activist in the United States. I will now read just a brief message from the world-renowned, award-winning Somali writer and citizen of the world, Nuruddin Farah, who is also with us here today. I've known Bra Willie Khosetsile since 1977, when we both attended Festac in Nigeria. And even though we were separated for decades because the lives we led as exiles, yet whenever we met in Los Angeles, Europe, or South Africa, we felt as though we were never apart for a single day. Whereas people change with changing times, Bra Willie was an exceptional man. He remained steadfast in his loyalty to his art, his philosophy, his ideal, and his friends. I am very proud that he thought of me as his friend. I also will read a short poem written by Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Jesse Duarte, a poem for Willie. Power in every verse more potent than political promise. Power in your written voice, clear and loud like crashing of lightning bolts. You lit up the gray skies and gave us a voice. Clear and loud with honesty your prose rang out. calling, calling, never claiming. Goodbye, my brother, with 8-point ayahs. I will turn it over to June now.
As I continue the acknowledgements, let me thank Professor Stefan Robelin for the message and also for having organized a tribute in the US at Rutgers very soon after Brawili's passing. Yes, Professor Robelin, indeed, together we are Brawili's people. I will now read an excerpt from the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. Comrade Willie was one of South Africa's literary giants, poet, revolutionary, and internationalist in his approach to the liberation struggle. Comrade Willie used his talent and the power of the pen to wage the struggle against oppression, as well as broaden the horizons of knowledge among the African people, irrespective of where they were. In this regard, he used his talent to assert African identity, pride, and dignity. He will surely be missed by his family, his friends, and comrades in the African National Congress, as well as our people as a whole. The Foundation conveys its heartfelt condolences to the family. Brawili was a giant among world and African scholars. I acknowledge the message from Professor Mishere Mugo, who delivered the International African Writers Lecture 3 years ago in his honor. Let me now also read an excerpt from another great scholar, the Nigerian Dr. Osita Ezeliora. For me, therefore, tribute about this great African poet is about celebrating life, not about mourning the dead. For indeed, people like Poet Willie hardly die. Here then is a statement that precedes his eventual physical departure from the universe of mankind. This way, sir, I salute you.
I'll read a brief excerpt of a poem that was received 2 days after Brawili's death, written by one of the South African poets who inspired him, Afzal Moola. You have departed on your final journey, respected Brawili. Your journeys have been many. You have walked avenues littered with thorns. You have walked the lonesome boulevards of exile. You have walked the revolutionary streets of struggle. We shall carry forward your life's mission, and we shall fight the demons of racism within us. We shall expel the narrow notions of tribe and creed. We shall honor you by honoring your example, never to bow to injustice, never fail to speak truth to power, to always strive to live with the humane essence of Ubuntu flowing through us. You've departed on your final journey, Brawili, yet you live on in our collective conscience that resides within us all. Hambagachle, Brawili. Also wish to acknowledge the Market Theatre, who organized Kwanele Gumbi, who organized the memorial and gave the artists, many of whom did not have the opportunity to pay their tributes, who will do so after this, after luncheon today here. Many artists will continue to pay their tributes. The Joburg Theatre, the Soweto Theatre. Let me also acknowledge a message from Daphne Muse, who's a writer, cultural activist based in California, who is organizing the librarians in the Bay Area to purchase Brawili's books. Allow me to read the last one that I'm going to read, the message from a colleague, writer, and comrade who spoke with Brawili at Brown University some years ago. The important presence of black cultural and political life, Kiorapetse Khositsile, a South African by birth, teaches us that place is a detail. The freedom fight is essential. I ask you, where is this, the song, the word, in church, in field, in juke joints, in shebeen, savannah, rainforests, or city pavements, have always defined the fundamental aspects of black life, whether in colonized Africa or white supremacist America. Struggle, in the words as meaningful today as when it was spoken in 1857. If there is no struggle, there is no progress, said by Frederick Douglass. After arriving in the United States in 1962, he, Brawili, almost immediately flung himself into the emerging black arts movement, becoming an increasingly influential voice. There is always challenge in his voice. In my favorite of his books, The Present is a Dangerous Place to Live. Where then is the authentic song? The young eyes will curse our cowardice with a simple, what do you do between despair and desire? June?
For those who came to the house, to the family, and expressed their condolences, but who were also an integral part of making these tribute services possible since Brawili's passing. I would like to acknowledge, especially amongst others, the presidency in its entirety, Minister Jeff Hadebe, and Brawili's dear friend, Comrade Paul Mashatile, the Department of Arts and Culture, and the Gauteng government, Premier David Makhura, and his excellent staff. As Brawili's life purpose was about the arts, he was a cultural warrior. We must acknowledge the artists who used their craft to ease our collective pain through music, dance, and poetry. Amongst them, just to name a few, John Kani, Brajonas Gwangwa, the poetic offspring of Brawili, Natalia Mulebatsi, Lebo Mashile, Philippa de Villiers, and the great friends, the musicians, Bra Fitzroy, Steve Dyer. Thank you. Brawili's work always reflected his love of his continent, Africa. Apart from the accomplished writers who have graced this stage or sent messages, there is amongst them additionally a constellation of Africa's greats. We have a message from Ama Ata Aidu. She says, Kiora Petse, you poet of our struggle, of us in the wilderness, of us triumphant, of us at the dawn of what we still trust is our new world. We shall miss you, Willie, but thankfully, only in terms of the physical aspects of your being. Beyond these, we have our memories and your incredible poetry. We shall miss you. A message from Wole Soyinka. He says, Brother Khositsile, all through the dark days of apartheid, Brawili was amongst the most reassuring voices that the flame of the human spirit remained unextinguished, its creative spirit unattenuated, and we were grateful for that. While the loss is keen, the memories remain fresh. I send my deeply felt condolences to his immediate family and to our extended clan in South Africa. I will end with a tribute by Brawili's friend and our great African writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. When I heard the sad news of the passing of my brother, Willie Khositsile, my first reaction was, what? I shall never hear your joyous laughter again? I think of Brother Khositsile and I want to smile. When I read his poetry, I want to shout hope. When I think of his life and work, I want to live and fight and struggle for a more humane world. But most of all, I want to celebrate life. For him, celebrating life meant caring for it, fighting for its expansion to include the least among us. I believe even now his spirit is watching us, urging us to celebrate life. In his life and work, he fought for the rights of all peoples to adequate food, water, clothing, and shelter. Indeed, for their right to light and joy. And his poetry His poetry voiced that vision. His spirit of love and laughter and hope dwells among us. Rest in revolutionary peace, great poet.
Thank you, Trevor and June. Brawili was a family man. He had abundant fatherly love. When his daughter Ipuseng was getting married, I really felt part of the family. When Brawili, his wife, Sis Baby, and Sis Balega asked me to be a real uncle to negotiate lobola. I will never forget that in 2012 in Mafikeng. His fatherly love is demonstrated by the poem, Random Notes to My Son, which reads as follows, one stanza. Beware, my son, words that carry the loudness of blind desire also carry the slime of illusion, dripping like pus from the slave's battered back. The children of Brawili will now pay their tribute to their father.
Dumelang bagolo. I take it we're all family here, so I'll end the protocols right there and just say Dumelang bagolo. I have no words. We have no words. Papa was my best friend. And I know I speak for all of us when I say so, and we all were convinced that you, of course, the individual, Ipuseng Khositsile, are his particular best friend. Thank you, Papa, for teaching us to respect adults, not fear them. For demanding that we keep our minds sharp and our hearts alive to love. Thank you for treating me like a princess, for bringing me coffee in bed, for teaching me standards. The day Papa passed, as Mama Baby was reading him poem after poem of works that he loved, all I could say to him is, Papa, you are the love of my life, and I mean it. I've asked myself how we will carry on, how our children, Moya's fast asleep, right in the front there. Another best friend of Papa's, how Pumi, his grandson, how they will carry on. And I think the responsibility lies with us. And we make this promise to you, Papa, that we will ensure that they live in books, they find the world in words written by you, and many others that you admire, and many young people that you have raised and also admire and respect. We love you.
Thank you very much. We have agreed that we will push the musical dedication a bit back. Fitzroy Ngukana Band and Steve Dyer just before the Deputy President of the country does his eulogy. So for now, we will go straight to a tribute by Mrs. Baby Kositsile to be read by Gail Mabalani.
Good morning. To the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa and President of the African National Congress, all protocols observed. All of you have done us honor, and I have no words other than those of gratitude for having ensured that my husband, my love, Willie, whom all of you call Bra Willie, got a rousing send-off. This moment of pain will always be counterbalanced by the understanding that all of you cared and came out in your numbers to help us through this dark moment. But I wish to address myself now to this man lying in the casket. Willie, love, I remember one of your poems which captivated me and encapsulated everything about you. My name is Africa. All things come to pass when they do, if they do. All things come to their end when they do, as they do. So will the day of the stench of oppression, leaving nothing but the lingering taste of particles of hatred woven around the tropical sun. While in the belly of the night, drums roll and peal a monumental song. To every birth, its blood. All things come to pass when they do. We are the gods of our day, and us, panthers with claws of fire, and songs of love for the newly born. There will be ruins in Zimbabwe, for real. Didn't rap say they used to call it Detroit? And now they call it destroyed. To every birth, it's pain. All else is death or life. Umpimetse, my love. I remember how you laughed your lungs out when you told me you were heavily criticized by someone for marrying a township girl. My response was, I was born in Alexandra Township, number 28 11th Avenue. I am unapologetically a township girl. Maybe that's what you liked about me, because when we first met, on Zetrawiti. Or was it perhaps due to the fact that when you played a jazz tune for me, I could easily identify the artist and tell you who's on the saxophone, the piano, the drums, etc. Thank you to my brother Dan and my late dad for introducing me to that genre of music. Or was it my height that attracted you? I guess all these are now rhetorical questions. What I know is that you were my best friend, my soulmate, my lover, my master of Umkhabul. If I could sing like Aimé Césaire, I would weave a song about the size of your worldwide heart. If I could sing, I would sing about the love we shared. And yes, I will always love my heart more, because I too, every time I miss you, it is in my heart where I will always find you. You remember the questions we asked each other, for instance, should you go first and I remain to walk the path of our 11th anniversary alone? Should you go first and I remain fighting battles alone? Finally, I am ready to put to practice what you said to me over the years. You often said, love, if you come across a big poo on the road, what do? Do you stand and scrutinize it? Hell no. Move on and walk. You said one should never give any emotional response to nonsense. I will never forget the last hours or so of your life on this earth. I held on to your right arm and I read to you. No serenity here. Sterling Plump, Joy Harjo, Emir Césaire, and Letter from Havana. Thanks to Sister Audrey, your favorite nurse at Mill Park Surgical ICU. Without her, I would have nearly missed the opportunity to say goodbye. I also know that you know that the vascular surgeons, especially Dr. Talib Monareng, did their best. He is one of the most brilliant and dedicated surgeons in this country of ours. I often sat back and marveled at how you loved your friends. You would say, "My brapallo, ek wonder waar sy. Ek moet hom opbel. Mindlos, how about lunch today?" And you would say, "Menyana o gatweng sebeletso, I wonder where she is." And Babsi, Barbara Masekela, is underground again. Your love for your children was immense. You were a great father. If you had the means, you would have bought a house for Tebe and Ipileng to ensure they stayed home permanently. You were always worried about Stooms. And you passed on not knowing that like you, he too was in great pain. You referred to Neo and Malebo as career students. Moya Muhle is going to miss zoo time. So will Lilita and Zoe. Good night, my love. Go and join a bigger and much stronger African National Congress branch, led by Tata, Owar Tambo, and all the veterans and stalwarts of this glorious movement. Your name is indeed Africa. This way, I salute you, my love, your wife. Thank you.
Thank you. What is not widely known is that Brawili was a staunch communist, a member of the underground SACP. Maybe that's the reason why the letter from Havana to be recited by Sam Shakong. Sam.
Baby and the extended family, friends, program directors, the Deputy President of the Republic. Before I read the letter, I'd also like to indicate to you my connection with Khosi. There is a phenomenon that most of us have experienced, even though a few of us are able to acknowledge it. It is called Masika Maitirelo, loosely translated, self-made relatives. I arrived in the United States in 1964. Willow had already been there, but later, around 1969, I moved on to Manhattan, and there we were neighbors. I lived on 115th Street. He lived on 112th. His daughter Ipeleng and my daughter Masai were born 3 months apart. That even brought us closer, especially when we were trying to compare parenting skills. And we're not very sure as to what we were doing, but we did it. So, Masai and Ipeleng grew up as cousins. Now today, that relationship has escalated. They are now called each other sisters. So that's the importance of Masika Maitirelo. And Masika Maitirelo, in most instances, you will find that those that you have classified as your relatives in this manner are even more trusted, trustworthy, less fighting and for whatever, inheritance or whatever. They are the ones that you can run to at your most painful moment. So from that point, that is how I claim Willie as my brother. We all have heard a lot of attributes about this man. He was a great man. Willow was loved everywhere, and he also loved. He penned this letter for Baby, his beloved wife. It is called a letter from Havana, and in parentheses, for Baby K. A while back, I sat with my little hand upon my tapestry of memory and my loin, leaning on the blues to find voice. If loving you is wrong, I do not want to do right. Now, though I do not possess 1,000 thundering voices, like Mazizi Kama, Kamtabula Wekunene, nor Chris Abani's mischievous courage, as I trace the shape of desire and longing, I wish I was a cartographer of dreams. But what I end up with is the stubborn question: should I love my heart more? Because every time I miss you, that is where I find you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now invite the Premier of Gauteng, Premier David Makura, to come and pay his tribute. After that, we'll have a musical item.
Thank you very much to our program directors, members of the bereaved family, Lapala Hositsile, my baby, the children and grandchildren, Miloko Lemitswale, the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa and the President of the ANC, His Excellency Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Mebale Kambete, ministers, deputy ministers, premiers, MECs, executive mayors, esteemed diplomats and international guests, the leadership of the ANC and other parties here present, the stalwarts and the veterans of our liberation struggle, artists and cultural activists, fellow mourners. On behalf of the people of our province, I convey our heartfelt condolences to the Hositsile family on this occasion that we give our dearest and ever-smiling Professor Hositsile our final salute. We are indeed gathered here to bid a fitting farewell to Brawili, a veteran freedom fighter and revolutionary, an accomplished intellectual, an artist extraordinaire, a cultural icon, a man of letters, a man of ideas, a man of action. For his priceless contribution to the remaking of South Africa, Brawili has been honored by our country with the conferment of the Order of Ikamanga and his appointment as the National Poet Laureate. I think it is perhaps proper to ask a question: how else can a nation like ours honor a man who used his voice and his sharp intellect to contribute so much to the cultural, intellectual, and ethical remaking of our country? One way in which we can honor Brawili is to place education, the arts, and culture once more at the center of our overall national efforts to transform our country into a truly democratic, truly equal, just, and prosperous society. It is my view that in many of our reconstruction efforts, we have not paid attention to the cultural, intellectual, and ethical renaissance, which is so central to any country's transformation. So how else can we honor Professor Hositsile? Perhaps we can honor him by calling once more for a national appreciation of the role of the creative and cultural industries in the transformation of our country. Perhaps we can also honor Brawili by repudiating intellectual laziness and unethical leadership. Perhaps we can honor Brawili by calling once more for an appreciation of his own works. Perhaps we can honor him by dreaming once again as a people and hoping again. For at the heart of his work over 5 decades lies both hope and dreams. In one of his poems, Wounded Dreams, Brawili warns against cynicism and calls us to rehabilitate our own dreams. I quote, "Though the present remains a dangerous place to live, cynicism would be a reckless luxury, a pile of toxic lies deodorized to sound like the most clear signage, showing us the way forward from here. Together we can and must rehabilitate our wounded dreams to reclaim and nourish our song," close quote. So Brawili was a man of hope and a man of dreams. So how else can we honor him? Perhaps we can honor him by rehabilitating the dream of a truly non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous South Africa. Perhaps we should honor him by renewing our own hope. We should choose to be hopeful because cynicism, as Brawili said, is a reckless luxury. We should choose to hope again because as the dark clouds of corruption, which compound poverty, inequality, and unemployment, shall clear in our country as we move forward, and that the sky, the color of the sky, shall be clear again, and perhaps blue. Perhaps we should honor him by ensuring that the dark clouds of the breakdown of our political institutions clears again, and that we get rid of all the ills of our society. Perhaps we should honor him by dedicating ourselves to restoring the rule of law, by building a more equitable society, and by ensuring that we in political office are more accountable. Perhaps we should honor him by heeding his call to place once more the arts at the center of every effort we are making as a people in our national democratic transformation. Many of us today talk about the importance of science and technology, but can we truly have genuine technological innovation without an appreciation of the arts? Perhaps we should honor Brawili by ensuring that in the revitalization of our townships and the township economy, we turn townships once more into centers that are vibrant spaces of cultural, artistic, and intellectual expression. Perhaps we should honor him by having more state-of-the-art theaters, such as the Soweto Theater, in the different parts of our townships and in the villages of our country. Perhaps we should honor him by making sure that we build more libraries and we read again and again and again. Perhaps we should honor him by making sure that our people understand that even in the midst of protest and anger with the authorities, they must never burn libraries and they must never burn books. So our nation has lost a soldier and a fighter for social justice. And this he did to the bitter end. This way we salute you, Brawili, Robala Kakahiso. Farewell. We will continue to celebrate your life. Thank you.